Christopher Walken, maybe.
Didn't we just
I
say to be nice to her? Come
that
on.
was nice. Always
That
nice.
was nice.
The
Okay,
rest of us
recording
see,
on.
yeah, the rest of us see what we have to go through in all of our meetings.
You mean the joy that you get to
The
experience?
joy, yes,
Thank
it's very
you.
joyful. You do bring a smile to our face, yes.
Growing up with 6 kids in my family and no TV, I was the entertainment.
Can see that. It takes a good imagination.
I didn't know you were that old. No TV, huh? Before the TV was invented? No wonder you think I'm so young.
Stacy, don't encourage her. Don't. You got to give no reaction because now
I
she's
stay muted. I can't help
no
you
the
saw
other
me laugh.
Stacy. Stacy with an E. She is like rolling. She was literally rolling on the ground and grabbing her side. So Kara,
Victor, I was all like, sorry.
no, you're not.
Oh,
We'll edit
All
this
right.
portion out of the video that we'll be posting later
of
on.
course, because you're the one getting ribbed, of course.
Of course.
Of course. So should we go ahead and get started? I know we have over 100 people registered. We only have about 24 joined so far. Do we want to go ahead and get started, or do we want to give everybody a minute?
Let's give him one more minute.
All right.
We can keep grilling Victor in the meantime. Everybody go
right.
ahead, John. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Hit him with your best shot.
Fire away.
Fire away. Mhm. Everyone's
Anybody
being
else
really
have
nice.
a count of trick-or-treaters?
0.
I had 130 to 150.
This was a really slow year for us. Yeah, I mean, I only counted up about 70 or so. We didn't have the one little guy that's been coming to our house since he was 3 years old, who's now basically a junior in high school, but I think he had like a game that he had to be at, so he'll probably be hitting me up one of these days. So that's kind of fun. But my daughter went over about 100 and she probably had about 180.
Yeah, a good year used to be like 300, but now that the cities start having, little events on Halloween, little parties, it's reducing.
Maya, one more comment, then it's all yours. When kids are too old, when they come to your door in a flannel shirt and they're taller than you and they say, I'm a lumberjack. It's like, no.
I don't know. The guy I was just talking about, he brought half of his football team with him 1 year. So I was like,
Victor, I thought it was too old when they drive to your house.
Exactly.
I figure I'm glad that
Alrighty.
they're trick-or-treating instead of out doing other stuff. So I'll give them all the candy they want.
Very true. Yep.
Yeah, that's true. And then what happens here, I don't know about everyone else, but we have an entire kitchen now full of everyone's leftover candy. So you can just come trick or treat in our offices now. So, all right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 12:03, and I know we still have quite a few people that will need to join us, but let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Washington State Chapter's November Lunch and Learn. We're really pleased to have 2 of our business council members here today to present to us. That was then, this is now, why suppliers are still choosing to no bid. I think many of you remember that this is actually, I think, the second you guys have updated that particular white paper, but the first one came out several years ago, and I found it very enlightening. So I'm really looking forward to today. But before we do that, I have a few housekeeping items. For folks in Washington State, just to remember, tomorrow is our fall conference and our 20th anniversary celebration. So we're looking forward to seeing you down at the Museum of Flight. We have a jam-packed day, and so we're really excited to be able to celebrate together in person and at such a beautiful venue. And then as you see, we have a number of upcoming events. We've got some virtual trainings. We've got the Emerging Professionals Roundtable. And I want to highlight the last 2 that we just added here in the last week. And one is January 3rd is our next Lunch and Learn. And that will be basically modernizing public procurement and intro to AI integration or AI and procurement. And Brooke Smith from Utah will be presenting that. We're looking forward to that as well. And then we just scheduled our annual business meeting. It will be January 18th and it'll be held down at DES. So keep that in mind and save the dates on your calendars.
And by DES, you mean in Olympia.
Olympia, yes, it'll be in Olympia. Department
For
of
our-
Enterprise Services.
For our non-Washingtonians, that's like DES. Cool. Where's that?
Cool, exactly. Olympia, Washington. So trying to move our meetings around the state a little bit. East Side, we're coming to you later. All right, so just as a reminder for folks, we do need to mute ourselves unless you are a presenter, because that helps everyone else enjoy the presentation. If you're trying to get credit for, especially from Washington, to have credit to attend this, please make sure that you have your entire full name. If you aren't familiar with how to do that now, just make sure you right click on your video and choose rename. And then I actually didn't hear how we were going to do questions. Are we going to take questions throughout the presentation, or do you want them all at the end and just have them drop them in chat?
It might be easiest if we wait until the end, but if there's something pressing, if someone can help me watch the chat, I'm happy to address it throughout.
We'll monitor chat for you guys then.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Appreciate
All
that.
right. Yeah, so make sure you drop those questions in chat or raise your hand. All right. So with that said, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to both of you, John and Danielle, and let you guys get started.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Victor, since you're top of my video, seeing my screen okay? That front slide?
Seeing it just great.
Cool. All right, great. Well, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. Victor has actually also agreed to be a panelist. So our discussion today is going to be a conversation about, just as Maya mentioned, the updated version of our the Business Council's white paper on We Know Bid, digging into why suppliers don't respond to your solicitations that you put out. But first, we're going to start with some introductions. So I'm Danielle Hinz. I'm currently an executive advisor with Amazon Web Services, or AWS. We are a member on the NIGP Business Council. I've been with Amazon now for about 5 years, but previously I was in public sector procurement for over 20 years. And was actually a member of the Washington State chapter when I was Chief Procurement Officer at King County. So it's so amazing to be back. Wish I could be in person with you all, but I'll take this virtual opportunity for the time being. So that's who I am. Victor, you want to go ahead? And I'm sure everyone knows you, but for those that may not, how about an intro?
Certainly. Victor Lemer, senior buyer in Spokane County. Been here now for 6 years. Prior to that, I worked for the state of Alaska doing procurement for the Department of Fish and Game and the Department for Administration, and did that for 30 years before retiring for 6 days and then ending up here in Spokane County, where I'm loving it. John, up to you now.
Perfect. Thank you, Victor. John Stodola, Government Contracts Manager for the Toro Company. I also serve on the NIGP Business Council, former chair of the Business Council. I've been with the Business Council for about 6 years and with the Toro Company for 8 years. Prior to that, held a government contracts manager role at Office Depot for several years. And I hold my PPSM, which is the Public Procurement Supplier Masters designation from NIGP, which is a newer designation that NIGP created. And I'll let Danielle talk a little bit more about that in upcoming slide here, but very proud to hold that designation, which we again helped establish through the Business Council here recently.
Great. All right. So, whoops, sorry. Too many slides. So I'm going to start with just an introduction about who the Business Council even is. We talked to a variety of chapters as well as at the NIGP annual forum, and understand that this council, even though it's been in existence for a while, can be relatively new to some folks. I want to start just with a brief introduction of who the Business Council is. So our mission is to really contribute content and expertise to you all and what you're doing in terms of the supplier side of the equation when it comes to procurement for public sector. The Business Council itself has 12 industry suppliers that serve on it. Each of these suppliers has 2 representatives that sit on that council. So there are 24 of us that meet regularly to talk about things that are important to us and how we serve NIGP. We also meet a couple times a year with the NIGP Governing Board to align on priorities and make sure that the efforts that we're undertaking serve NIGP and its membership in the way that is intended. And then, as John mentioned, he has his PPSM. So this is a certification that's much like the professional certifications that many of you are already familiar with. But this is directed at suppliers. So our business council is almost entirely certified now, meaning that those 24 representatives that sit on that, if they don't have a procurement practitioner certification, whether that be a CPPB or CPPO or NIGP CPP, we are encouraging our representatives on the business council to attain their PPSM, which many of them have done. And then we also talk about this with other suppliers that sell into public sector, letting them know that this is a great way for them to learn how public procurement does their business and the things that are important to them, and how we as suppliers can help better serve public sector
And
organizations.
Danielle, I'd just like to add to that is,
Please.
from my standpoint, not having served in the public procurement space, we're never going to have that opportunity to serve in the public procurement space. And although I've been working in the public procurement space for a long time, I'm never going to have the chance to sit in your all's seat in the public procurement chair. And so this gives us the closest opportunity that we can to understand what you go through on a daily basis, learning the mission and public benefits, compliance, transparency, social responsibility, those types of things that you're going through on a regular basis. And so for us that haven't served on that side, it allows us to kind of start that conversation at a much higher level that we wouldn't be able to otherwise, even if we think that we know what you're doing and what you're experiencing on a regular basis. It just allows us to start that conversation at a much higher level.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, John. So the Business Council started many years ago, back in 2006, and it started as a sponsorship opportunity for NIGP. So the suppliers that sit on the council pay to be on that council and pay a sponsorship fee to do that. And so originally that was really where this partnership started, but pretty quickly evolved into, how can the suppliers that sit on that provide more benefit to the membership of NIGP? And so where that has moved to is being more in this thought leadership role, where several white papers have been authored by the Business Council. And here's sort of a timeline of those. So at the front of the meeting here, we mentioned that the topic that we're talking about today is a revision of an earlier white paper. So that was actually the very first white paper that was issued in 2013 by the NIGP Business Council. And it came out of a conversation with the NIGP Governing Board, where the Business Council was brainstorming with the Governing Board about, topics that were would be potentially of value to NIGP membership. And one person on the governing board leaned over and said, I just want to know why you guys aren't bidding on my stuff, right? And so that really became the topic of the very first white paper that the Business Council put out, which was why we no bid. And then just in 2022, we issued a revision of that, updated that, and that's what we're talking about today. So with Victor and John's help, we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But then on the NIGP website, there are also several other white papers that are available for you to review on these other topics that are listed on this slide. And unless Victor's already done it, we will drop in the link to that website here as we go through the meeting. And we've talked about that. So, in chat, which I don't think I can't see at the moment, but please, in chat, if you could drop in your thoughts on what does it mean to you when suppliers don't respond to your solicitations. So here's an example. you're working with your end user. They say, oh, I expect we're going to get, these 3 suppliers to give us a bid at least, and hoping maybe we get more. And maybe you get 5, but the 3 that you thought were going to bid, maybe one of them responds, right? And others don't. And you know that many other suppliers got a copy of that solicitation, but you didn't receive any response back from them. So what do you think, why wouldn't a supplier respond? So if you can take a moment, drop that into chat, that'd be great.
I also put in there the links to the white paper, the various white papers, and then direct links to the old We Know bid and the current version too. Yeah. Great reads if you would like to read those sometime.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Victor. Okay. Victor, looks like you're looking at the chat. Are you able to maybe read out a couple that folks dropped in there?
Sure. I'll just take a couple that jump out. Too short of a notice. Solicitation too complex, long, confusing, restrictive. You could add your own adjective there.
Yep.
Might not have enough information. Insurance requirements, they're too busy, not worth their time. Scope is intricate. Evaluation criteria is too onerous. Requirements too complex and specific. Don't trust our system.
Interesting. Yeah, great. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those resonate, right, with what we found. So in the white paper, whoops, I gotta make sure I'm there when I hit next. So the top 10 reasons that exist in this white paper about why we no bid, a lot of those are represented here. And we're going to talk about actually 4 of these of the 10. We don't have time to go through all 10, but so we picked 4 that we thought would be most interesting, and that's what we're going to dig into today with Victor and John. But certainly in the white paper, there's more information about these top 10 reasons that suppliers don't respond to your bids or proposals. I do want to call out that the order that these are listed in is not sort of order of importance or rank order in any way. It's more a timeline order. So these are ordered in the sort of timeline of a solicitation. So I just want to point that out before we go on here. Okay, so the first one that we're going to dig into is around pre-solicitation meetings. And I do just want to point out, again, a differentiation here. When we say pre-solicitation meetings, you may be thinking of a pre-bid meeting, which is not what this means. So what this is really any way that you, as a public procurement official, or maybe the end user that you're working with, is doing kind of industry gathering of information before you put out your solicitation. So whether this could be a request for information, or perhaps you issue a draft RFP, perhaps you actually hold some pre-solicitation meetings with suppliers, either one at a time or many, whatever the format is, it's what you're doing to gather intel to inform the solicitation before it goes out on the street. So that's what we mean when we say pre-solicitation meeting. So Victor, I'm going to start with you. And I would love to hear, under what circumstances does your agency, Spokane County, or agencies that you've worked for in the past, when do they hold pre-solicitation meetings? And what other mechanisms might you use to gain that industry expertise that can inform your solicitation?
Thanks, Danielle. It's often when it's a complex or new technology or procedure or a major high value, high risk, high politically charged type of project, and the end user, the project manager, is not necessarily up to date in regards to what's available. So we'll get commissioned to go out and do some market research. And this is, as you said, this is before the cone of silence is in place, which allows us to have conversations with any supplier because there's nothing out on the street that's prohibiting it. So that's why we do it. The problem is essentially who's doing it. If you have the project manager doing it, there's bias and some tainting going on. But essentially, anytime we really want to get a pulse on market research and go beyond a Google search, we'll meet with particular leaders in that industry to find out what's happening in their line of business.
And Victor, I'm interested in kind of the format of those. Do you have sort of a standard format that you use when you hold those, or is it really kind of solicitation specific, or can you dig in a little bit more about what those actually look like?
Sure. When I was with the state of Alaska, we would reach out to top 5 businesses in that particular industry, which we would have research to show why they're the top 5. It could be their current spend with the state, or a report that comes out showing we're not picking and choosing it, we're basing it on objective information. Unlike a pre-bid or pre-proposal meeting, this is one-on-one procurement and a supplier, where we're just asking them basic questions. What's currently going on in this industry? How are things changing? And I'll even share a little bit more with these pre-solicitation meetings is, no, I'll share the request for information in just a little bit, but it's that one-on-one with the business leaders to find out what's happening in their industry at that time. That's essentially how we do it, how we should do it.
Yeah. And have you gotten value out of that, or can you speak a little bit more about what value you get out of those conversations?
Usually it's because the project manager is so involved with the project and not aware often in regards to current business standards, procedures, technology, that it really allows us to get some more information and come back to them and report in a summary format. Hey, here's some things to consider too, or draft the proposal that allows for an open-ended response instead of telling the supplier, this is what we want and this is how you're going to do it, because that's what you'll get exactly. Instead, I find with project managers, if we tell them all you have to do is define the project, the problem that you're trying to solve and what the solution may look like, the type of level of service, but not so restrictive that it does not allow a lot of creativity from the suppliers. So the broader we can be in defining the problem and allowing more creative solutions is such a better response that we've been seeing lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. At least, in the procurements that I have visibility to on the supplier side are, of course, technology. And that's exactly what we think is a best practice for those when they're bidding out something complex is, start with that problem statement and allow suppliers to come in with what those solutions can be. So John, love your perspective here on these pre-solicitation meetings. First of all, how often do you see public sector organizations holding these meetings?
Well, thank you, Danielle. Let me just start by saying, from the original white paper that we created, the We Know bid back in 2012? The number one reason why suppliers choose not to respond to a solicitation is because we don't have an opportunity to meet with an agency prior to the formal RFP coming out. Having gone through this another time, 10 plus years later, that same sentiment is still true today. So the number one reason, although that ranking that you had before wasn't a rank order, the number one reason why agencies or suppliers choose to not respond is because we don't have the ability to meet prior to. And that's whether it's formal or informal. From a formal standpoint, a pre-solicitation meetings are very infrequent, whether they, and almost non-existent. So again, that could be an RFI or a pre-solicitation conference that an agency might hold prior to that code of silence, but they are almost non-existent from what we see. I can remember years ago when I was at the previous company I mentioned, Office Depot, I was working with a large state opportunity, and this is not all that unusual, but I was working with a large state opportunity. They had a relationship with one of our competitors, and I knew that that contract was going to come up for renewal in a year. And so proactively, I reached out, wanting to build a relationship, wanting to share some of the new technologies that we had, things that I knew were going to benefit them, from warehousing to some of the e-commerce capabilities that we had, some things that I knew would benefit them as an agency. And frankly, I knew our competitors didn't have those capabilities at that time. And so I reached out about 12 months in advance, and they said, you know what, you're way too early. We're 12 months out. We're not thinking about office supplies. Contact us in 6 months and let's have a conversation. So I reached out 6 months later and said, hey, you know, again, you've asked me to follow up. I'm reaching out 6 months from now. Your contract is coming up for renewal. We're still too early. Call us back in 3 months. Okay, trying to follow suit, trying to be a good steward. Called back 3 months later. We've started creating our RFP. We're now in a cone of silence. We can no longer talk to you. And at that point, it's just too late. You know, from our standpoint, we don't have the ability then to share what's new, what's coming out, and not necessarily influence, but share with them what's changed in the market so that they can have a better understanding of maybe what needs exist. Because if they don't understand what's changed, what's updated from 3 to 5 years prior, then we have no chance. Victor, it looks like you have a question.
Victor, there's
No,
like multiple hands going on.
No, John's comment about being proactive reminded me of something our neighbor to the east does, Idaho, and they actually won a reward for this. And John, that's it. It's that while the cone of silence is not in place, that's when we need to reach out to suppliers. And Idaho has this great process in regards to requests for information, where they will actually post their scope of work in draft form well in advance, saying, this is where we're headed with a particular project. Please let us know what information is missing that you need in order to give a good proposal. They then will do they being the procurement, not the project manager, will interview the first 5 suppliers in that service or good with generic questions to find out more information. And then the cool thing is, then procurement gives a summary to the project manager saying, this is what information is needed, and here's some other ideas to consider. It prevents any bias from the project manager knowing who the suppliers are. And it also gives key current information that may be missing that will help everyone do a better job. And I just posted in the YouTube of their presentation from the state of Idaho. And in procurement, we don't steal from one another, we borrow. I encourage you to watch this, borrow their RFI process and make it your own, and you will get much better responses from suppliers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Victor. And John, I would second your comment around we're not going to respond to a solicitation when we're reading the RFP, if that's the first sort of touch point that we've had with the organization about that particular need. Because quite honestly, we know they've been talking to our competitors, or they've been talking to other folks and not us to shape that. And so they might not even be interested in our solutions. So I think that's a great call out. But let's move into, I know, I differentiated these pre-solicitation meetings from pre-bid meetings, but I know a lot of organizations, sort of have question marks about, are these of value? If so, what value are they providing? You can do a pre-bid conference and procurement, you walk in all prepared and all these suppliers show up and nobody says a word and you're basically reading the RFP to them. And so there can be some questions about whether there's value there or not. So let's just spend a moment touching on this, because I think this is a fun topic to dig into a little bit. So Victor, I'm going to start with you. When do you hold pre-bid meetings, and kind of what value do you get out of them, or when are you deciding not to have them and why?
Okay, this is first my pessimistic old self speaking. It's a waste of time. It's like Ferris Bueller's classroom where the teacher's speaking and all you hear are crickets. But that's the old bad attitude. This is an opportunity to train suppliers in that you're not adding additional information. You're pointing out all the features within your proposal, including, here's the scope of work, here's the deliverables that are required in your proposal, here's the due date, here's how to ask questions, here's how to question specifications. I'll go back to my prior self and say there's nothing worse than saying in a conference meeting with your suppliers, and someone raises their hand and says, what's the due date? And the response is on page 2, paragraph 3, the due date reads, and there's nothing more frustrating when we're responding to Q&A that we get online, and they ask a question and the response is on page.
Mm-hmm.
It's very frustrating using that time to read through the proposal as if it's their first time. But if you take that time to train them and you give them advance notice, they'll come in with open ears, most likely will not reveal their hand, but it's more of an opportunity to train the supplier in the scope of work and the essential information and the means of communication and options that they have moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. So, John, from a supplier side, what makes you decide whether or not you're going to attend a pre-bid meeting?
Well, if I'm considering responding to a solicitation, I'm going to attend the pre-bid meeting. I think it makes sense to attend those meetings. My standard process is if I get a solicitation, I read through the solicitation from front to back. I understand, that way I can have an understanding of what are the details of it. When is that pre-bid meeting? When are the questions due? What are the details? When is the solicitation due? And I can read through the details of that solicitation. And that way I can attend the pre-bid meeting with the questions, initial questions in hand and in mind. So this was a great transition because I know you're not reading the chat, but that is exactly what's going on in the chat is about the
Nice.
pre-bid question, right? Or the pre-solicitation meeting.
Mhm.
It's that suppliers aren't attending it, or if they do attend it, that they're tight-lipped. And
Yep.
I would tell you that maybe I'm a little bit too transparent. I will ask the questions. I have no problem asking the questions because frankly, I know that this is a public bid and anybody's going to have access to any of the questions that I ask anyhow. All of my responses are going to be public knowledge when I respond. However, I do know that most suppliers are tight-lipped. They don't want to give up any competitive information in a group setting. I don't know if it's fully based on that or if they're worried that they're going to ask a stupid question or what the deal is. But I can tell you of all the pre-bid meetings that I've attended, very few people ask questions. And to Victor's point, if they do, they're asking questions that are in the solicitation and not really directed questions that can help anyone move forward in the solicitation. So I think they're extremely helpful. I think it's good to put everybody on that even playing field so that we all understand what are the details, how do we respond to the solicitation, and then we can ask clarifying questions as we enter prior to the Q&A portion of that solicitation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. Before we move on to the next topic, since you guys are looking at the chat, is there anything in there that we should address, questions or otherwise that we should address before we move on to my favorite topic, favoritism?
No, I just appreciate John's comments because it wasn't until this year when I actually did a survey on vendor engagement and reached out to suppliers and said, why do you want these meetings? And it was like, wow, you intend them because it's not just a dance that we have to do. It's because you're coming there to show your interest and also get not additional information, but you're finding out who the players are for the business side of it. But then also, as you hear it, not only John reads it, but as you're hearing the details, it's going to spark some questions that I love the Q&A after those meetings because why do you have to have a green tractor? Great question. You could have asked that in the meeting, but I appreciate the anonymous aspect of those questions coming in because, again, we're not revealing who's sharing that information or who's asking those questions, but happy to share that information with everybody at the same time.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, great. So let's move on then to the next topic, which is favoritism, whether that's intended or perceived favoritism. So I know this word just sends off, smoke alarms and strong beeping signals, alerts, Amber Alert, there we go, in our brains as procurement practitioners. So, one of the core beliefs, of course, of our profession is to be impartial and fair. And so the idea that a solicitation could be even just perceived as having favoritism built into it is something that we take very seriously. So, so I thought it was interesting that this made the top 10 as why, suppliers aren't bidding, because I feel like in my past, we've worked so hard to make sure that our solicitations don't show favoritism, and yet it's one of the top 10 reasons suppliers don't respond to us. So we're going to spend a minute digging in here, probably more than a minute, few minutes. Victor, we're going to start with you, and I just want to know, one of your vendors comes to you and says, hey, the solicitation that you just put out, you've been working on for a year. It's got some requirements in here. It's clear that these are specific to one supplier, and we're not going to bid because we think you just have decided already who you're going to award to. So what would you do in that, or what do you do in that situation? Hopefully you've never been under it. So maybe what would you do under that, in that situation?
Well, my sarcastic response is, well, after I go out to dinner with that supplier and we have, quality time and we talk about this and
This
I
is
share
being
what
recorded, Victor.
more inside
it's being
details.
Recorded.
I know that was my sarcastic person, but in reality, our job is to protect the process. And if a supplier came to me with that claim, first I would say thank you, and then I would ask for more information. We play Switzerland in the sense that we will hear one side and we will trust, but then verify on our side if that is true or not. So I want all the details possible that may lead to that. And then I will go to the project manager with that information. But previous to that, when we're building the RFP, we'll sit down and we'll look at the scope of work, the mandatory requirements, and I will ask those why questions. Why does it have to be a green tractor? Well, because our fleet is made of green tractors. Then let's change it from green tractor to John Deere. Can it be an equivalent? No, it can't be equivalent. All that is hashed out in the drafting stage to avoid bias, restrictive specifications, because we're supposed to be fair, open, and transparent. But then when the supplier comes with that claim and I get that additional information, I will go to the project manager and I will, I've been known to say, have you been at a conference recently and saw a demonstration or talked to a supplier about a specific good or service? Yes. Are these specifications from a flyer or their website? No. If yes, then we have that further discussion to say, okay, is there a reason why it has to be 26.3 miles per gallon? No. Okay, then let's change it to go, can we go 23 to 28 miles per gallon to make that range more open for more competition? It's often, I wouldn't say they have their blinders on, but they're often jaded when they get that information themselves rather than coming to us to do the research. So I will investigate and I will change if it is restrictive either to be a sole source or a equivalent, or we'll change those specifications. John, is that the type of response that would make you happy?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's a willingness to, what I would say to that, Victor, however, what we've seen is a lot of times we're all up against a time crunch. And a lot of times the business unit or the end user that you're working with puts a lot of pressure on the time to get the equipment that they're trying to get. And so that is what we end up seeing when we do identify what we perceive to be favoritism. In your example of the green paint, right? So if green paint is a requirement, or even red paint in our example, you know, for Toro, the color of the paint should not be a requirement. There has to be a need and a use for that specification to do something, a task within your organization that color paint couldn't do otherwise. Otherwise, the color of the paint shouldn't make a difference. So for us, when we're reviewing favoritism, we need to first draw it to your attention and make sure that you are aware of it and provide you with some justification and specifications as to why we believe that it is favoritism. And frankly, if you're willing to look at it and give us feedback as to why it's necessary, and if there's reason for it, so be it. If it's green because your school color is green and it has to be green because it needs to fit in, then that's a good justification. And can we make our red mowers, can we wrap them in with a green, wrap? Okay, then that might be a requirement. But for most cities or municipalities, the color of the paint shouldn't make a difference. Now, you mentioned miles per gallon. What we see sometimes is the horsepower being something that somebody will specify. And instead of being 26 horsepower, it's, you can tell it is exactly what our competitor has. It's 26.2 horsepower requirement, and it has a length of, 4.5-inch bearings. And, there's direct specifications that are geared towards a competitive unit that clearly they took from a specification from one or the other. And we've seen it on our side as well. And we can provide that information to say, hey, what is the need for this? And would this work? Because we might be able to provide you with the same or a better alternative. Maybe we have a hybrid unit that can meet those same horsepower requirements, but in a sustainability solution that gets you better gas mileage, gets you some sustainability credit within your organization, but still meets it, but at a lower horsepower. So if we can meet those requirements, but we have to provide that to you, and you have to be willing to look at that. But if there is a true interest in that green colored paint or that John Deere mower, your end user is going to come back and say, no, I can't use that. That won't work for us. And try to provide justification as to why they don't want it, because frankly, their people are used to running one type of a unit. And so that's where we struggle with it. And that is when we get to a point where we would say, you know what, we haven't had a conversation. Let's go back to the first thing we started talking about. We haven't had a conversation with you. We haven't had a conversation with your end user potentially at this point. And now they're specifying they want a competitive product. At least that's the way it appears. There's no way that we're going to respond to that. So you're doing a disservice by not having open competition, and you're basically just sole sourcing a competitive unit at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Just looking at time, I know we want to leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next topic, which is around debriefs. And I've always advocated for debriefs because I think that this the idea of kind of closing the feedback loop with the suppliers and those that have taken the time and incurred the cost to submit a proposal deserve the feedback that we can give them. But I know, you know, they're difficult. You don't, in procurement, necessarily always feel like you have all the information. You get concerned about, you know, what is the supplier actually asking for? What, you know, why do they want to come meet me? What's their ulterior motive? So let's spend a minute here talking about some debrief. So, John, I'm going to start with you on this topic, actually. Of the debriefs that you've been a part of throughout your career, what makes them great? Like, you know, you walk into a debrief and you walk away and you feel like that was a really good experience. You got what you needed out of it. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. It's probably easier to talk about what a bad debrief looks like than it is a
I was
good
trying
one.
to leave it positive, but you do
yeah.
you, John.
Okay, thank you. No, and that's not the intent here. A good debrief is one where we can gain a better understanding of how we can improve, right? So I don't have a specific example other than to say, I do have an example of a national cooperative that we responded to, and they were able to walk through. One of our sister companies was not awarded the solicitation, so it was a multiple award, and Toro was awarded, but one of our sister companies was not. They had held a previous award, done millions of dollars of business through this award, and frankly, they kind of assumed they were going to be re-awarded that agreement. And so they asked me to sit in on the debrief to better understand why they weren't awarded, because they felt like they should be awarded that agreement. They were, again, had done so much more business than many of the companies that were awarded this multiple award. And frankly, they came out and said, listen, you were not thorough in your marketing response. You were not thorough in the way that you responded to the way that you can meet the needs of our solicitation here. And we are not taking past experience into consideration. And so they walked through each component of their scoring criteria and allowed us to better understand where they maybe missed the mark. Most of the bad ones that I'm referring to, they take you through and they just say, you got 5 points for marketing.
Wait, that doesn't tell you everything about how to improve?
Right. Yeah. If just telling us, repeating what we can already see on the scoring criteria does not help us. And frankly, I would say that's probably more so what happens in the debriefs. And the example of the national cooperative is kind of the exception and not the rule. So my suggestion or the request would be spend a minute and talk about how we can improve, break down the scoring criteria so that we can actually learn from that and improve on our next solicitation, whether that be with your agency or another agency, so that we can all do better in our responses.
Yeah. So Victor, not to put you on the spot here, but when you do debriefs, are you giving that level of detail that John wants and needs? And whether you are or aren't, talk about why.
Well, he sounds like he's very needy. I don't understand why they need this information, because our RFP was so perfect. You know, if they didn't get the contract, that's their problem. No, again, sarcastic side. All right. This is hard for me to say about procurement people. I'm not going to say lazy, but I'm going to say poor planning, because
Interesting. Okay.
you can't come
Talk more about that.
You can't come to your evaluation team 3 weeks afterwards and say, I have a debrief scheduled. Can you tell me why you gave them a 5 out of 20 points? That's not the time to get that information. I love giving debriefs because I want the supplier to do better next time. And in a learning lab that's coming up on WANIGP, and I'm putting the links in the chat, we have a preview coming up next month, and then 6-week series kicks off in February. Something we say often is the end in mind. When you're drafting your RFP, it's at that time you're creating your evaluation score sheet. And instead of saying, knowledge and experience, possible points, 10 with a blank for what they're going to put in there on their evaluation. You need to have additional space there with comments, pros, cons, areas for improvement, and then open-ended questions, not did they have knowledge? How did they have knowledge? How did they compare with others? You need to capture that information when they're doing the evaluation. So when that debrief comes, you have that information ready to go. Now, the thing that sometimes scares the evaluation team is, I don't want my name going on there. I don't want that information. I provide a summary, and it's all the comments combined. There's no reference to the evaluators. There's no sharing information about any other proposals. It's just, here's your information. Here's where you did well. Here's where you could improve. I don't use the word bad in my debrief, but I want them to walk away having value, knowing, okay, this is where we can improve.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would love to do a little myth busting or maybe myth proving here. You know, one of the things that I've heard in the past is, well, debriefs are just from those vendors who want to protest, right? They want to come in and have us slip up or give them some bit of information that they can use to protest. So John, when you go and do debriefs with an organization or you request a debrief, are you doing it so you can protest?
No, we almost never have done a protest. I think we've done a protest once in the 8 years that I've been at Toro, and it was a very blatant reason for the protest. One of the comments in the chat here from Megan mentioned that she provides comments and scores during the debrief. And then she also went on to say, but that doesn't always work, to give the pros and cons with the scoring and debrief. And I would agree with that. So to quickly answer your question, no, it's not related to a protest. But I will also say, agree with Megan here. Some suppliers just don't want to hear it. So please do the debrief. Please be detailed, provide the pros and cons with your response, and understand that some suppliers still don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear why they put in the time and effort. They may have expected that they were going to get it. Even in the case of our sister company, they fully expected that they were going to be awarded that agreement. They had done millions of dollars of business with this national cooperative. They had every reason to believe that they were going to be re-awarded that contract because of the amount of business that they did. They wanted to complain. That is also why people will do a debrief, is they want to complain about why they were not awarded. So full transparency, that is another reason why suppliers may want to do a debrief.
Yeah.
As transparent as you can be, as detailed as you can be on why they scored the way they scored. That's all we can ask you to do.
John, isn't proposals kind of like speed dating in a way? And when you don't get that second date, it's kind of like that feeling. It's like, what I had fresh breath. I dressed nice. What didn't you like? We had a good time. It's kind of like that attitude. And there have been times when suppliers come in with an attitude, but I kind of have this game. I'm going to win them over, and they're going to walk away having a good talk and a good feeling. And I'm going to see them at the next RFP.
Exactly. Yep. And that's what you hope for. That's why you do the debriefs. You want the competition. You want them to come back, and you want them to feel good about coming back.
Here's another thing is you should sometimes have the suppliers debrief you so that you know how you could do your proposal better next time.
Right. I love that you called that out, Victor, right? Like, what a powerful question to have at the end of your debrief, right? And what feedback do you have for us? What can we do better? It occurs to me just that, what you guys were talking about is like this partnership that public procurement, public organizations have with their suppliers is important when it's that one-to-one relationship. But I also think keeping in mind that unfortunately public sector tends to get lumped into a bucket you know, much like we like to lump a lot of things into buckets these days. But, you know, if you're difficult to work with, then suppliers are going to start to say, oh, public sector is too hard to
Yes.
work with, right? We're going to focus on commercial. They have plenty of business. They're easier to deal with, right? So I think these processes that show that you're open to the competition, you're open to conversation, you're wanting to get better yourself, you're wanting them to get better as suppliers. I just think that level of partnership is incredibly important, especially in this day and age. If the past few years have taught us nothing other than we need to be closer partners to help folks, you know, to help all of us get through the hard times. So I'm going to move on to cost to procure, and Victor and John, don't be too upset. I'm going to cut out the conversation here because we're at 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure we at least get a couple questions and allow the chapter to wrap up their meeting at the top of the hour as we promised.
We've touched on some
So
very interesting topics, and
Yeah.
I feel bad that we only have an hour because we could be here for 6 hours with some of the
We
questions
could.
that have come in.
Yeah, we
Agreed.
could come back. So all I'm going to say about this topic is we have more research on this that the Business Council is undergoing currently. We've done over the last year. But one of the top reasons that suppliers don't propose is that the cost to propose, you know, those staff costs and other costs associated with preparing a response, that exceeds the contract's value. So there's always a go, no go decision that every supplier is making as to whether they're going to respond to a bid or an RFP. And part of that is, you know, can we recover our costs of proposing, especially in an environment where we're not so certain that we have the right solution to be providing in this situation. So there's been a lot of work done both by the Business Council members as well as public sector organizations to understand what is it costing not only for the suppliers to propose, but for public sector organizations to procure. We think it's important, and so do public sector organizations think it's important to understand what that cost is, so that you can decide what the right procurement path is. And just to know that your suppliers are making the same decision. And so, you know, in the spirit of partnership, knowing what it's costing you to procure is also valuable in a lot of different ways. And again, that's a whole nother session that the Business Council is offering. And so, you know, my pitch on the Business Council's behalf is if this topic sounds of interest, we'd love to come back to a future Washington chapter event and dig into this one a little bit more. Again, we do it as a panel so that we have supplier and practitioner perspectives on this because both are, of course, incredibly important. And so just a couple things here real quick. Resources, there's a whole slew of them that Victor has popped into the chat. So please take avail of those. A lot of the resources, white papers, et cetera, that the Business Council has put out are on the NIGP website under resources along the top bar. So if you have access there, you can get white papers and other research papers that have been issued. And there we go. Big blue screen on questions. Probably have 1 or 2 minutes. I'm going to pop the chat open, but Victor and John, if you've been reading along more frequently, are there any questions in there that you want to call out and we should address?
One that jumped out to me was where does John get his hair done? It's fabulous. No, wait, no, that was the wrong question.
Victor,
No,
come
the
on
question
in.
that came up was who is involved with the debrief? And it should be best practice only procurement, none of the evaluation team members. Although there are times when subject matter experts will be on there in IT related and they can share some of their opinions, but I highly recommend that nobody but procurement be involved in those meetings.
Okay. Anything else? Any other good chats? Wow, I'm scrolling through, seeing some familiar names. Yay.
Kara, did anything jump out to you as questions that we can ask real quick?
There's a quick one that I want to call out here real quick. Somebody asked if they can save the chat. I think that's a good one here. Down in the bottom by the 3 dots, if you click on the 3 dots on the bottom of your chat, you can click save chat, and that should save all the comments and details for where Victor posted those links as well.
That's awesome. All right, well, with less than 1 minute left, I'll toss this back over to the chapter. Victor, Maya, not sure who's closing us out here, but thank you so, so much on behalf of the entire Business Council. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with your chapter today. Hope it was valuable.
Thank you, Danielle and Victor and John. We so appreciate you coming. I think we all got a lot out of this, and I'm looking forward to the cost to propose session. I think we'll talk as a Lunch and Learn team this afternoon, but I think that'd be a fantastic 2024 addition to our Lunch and Learn lineup. So thank you so much. And that is it for me. Just a reminder that our next week we have an Emerging Professionals Roundtable here. It's at 2 o'clock next week virtually, and then everyone mark their calendars for our January 18th business meeting. So